At the wedding, the vampire king chose her sister, so she disappeared, carrying his twins. "Do you take this woman to be your eternal queen?" The high priest's voice echoed through the ancient, velvet-draped cathedral. Eliana smiled, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, her hand outstretched toward Sean. But Sean's crimson eyes, usually warm with centuries of hidden tenderness, were locked onto the front pew. He stepped back, letting Eliana's hand fall into the freezing air. "I cannot," Sean declared, his voice shattering the silent anticipation. The entire vampire court gasped as one. He didn't look at Eliana. He turned, his dark gaze settling on the woman beside her. "I choose Khloe, her sister." Eliana's world collapsed, and deep within her womb, two tiny, unseen sparks of life flared. The silence that followed Sean's declaration was not empty. It was a heavy, suffocating entity that pressed against the soaring Gothic arches of the cathedral. Thousands of candles flickered in the sudden draft, casting long, trembling shadows across the faces of the immortal aristocracy seated in the pews. Eliana stood frozen at the altar, the intricate lace of her white gown suddenly feeling like a shroud pulling her down into the earth. She stared at the space where Sean's hand had just been, the phantom warmth of his skin rapidly replaced by the biting chill of the ancient stone chamber. For a moment, her brain simply refused to process the words. She looked up at him, searching the sharp, familiar planes of his face for the punchline of a cruel, impossible joke. But Sean's jaw was set like granite. His crimson eyes, which had looked at her with such profound, world-altering devotion just hours before in the privacy of his chambers, were now flat and unreadable. He was staring past her, his gaze locked onto the front row where Eliana's older sister, Khloe, sat clad in deep emerald velvet. "Sean?" Eliana whispered. The single syllable tore at her throat, a fragile, desperate sound that was swallowed instantly by the cavernous room. He did not flinch. He did not blink. He slowly turned his broad shoulders away from her, the heavy, gold-embroidered midnight fabric of his ceremonial cape sweeping the marble floor with a soft, final hiss. From the front pew, Khloe rose. Her movements were fluid, predatory, and entirely devoid of surprise. A slow, triumphant smile curled the edges of her ruby-painted lips. Where Eliana was half-human, possessing a fragile mortality that the court had always whispered about, Khloe was a pure-blood vampire. She possessed the icy, flawless perfection of their kind, and as she stepped up to the dais, the murmurs of the court shifted from shock to a low, murmuring hum of approval. "My king," Khloe murmured, her voice a silken purr that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. She extended her pale, perfectly manicured hand. Sean took it. The physical connection between them sent a visible shockwave through the magical wards of the cathedral. The ceremonial brazier behind the altar, meant to burn white with the purity of a true mate bond, suddenly flared a violent, aggressive violet. Eliana felt the breath leave her lungs as if she had been struck in the chest with a battle hammer. The psychic tether that she and Sean had spent the last 2 years carefully weaving a bond built on shared secrets, stolen kisses in the moonlight, and whispered promises of a future that bridged their two worlds, snapped. The pain of the severing was agonizing. Eliana stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest. She gasped for air, her vision tunneling as the sheer agony of the broken bond radiated through her nervous system. She expected someone to step forward. She expected the high priest to halt the madness. She expected Sean to turn around, to realize his mistake, to catch her before her knees gave out. None of it happened. The high priest, recovering his composure with the fluid ease of a seasoned politician, cleared his throat and adjusted his silver stoles. "The king has made his choice," the ancient vampire announced, his voice booming over the murmurs. "The bloodline recognizes its own." Eliana was a ghost at her own wedding. The eyes of the court, hundreds of predatory, calculating stares finally shifted to her. There was no pity in those immortal gazes, only the cold, hard judgment of a society that had always viewed her as lesser, a fragile plaything that the king had thankfully discarded before making a permanent mistake. Bile rose in the back of her throat, thick and acidic. She looked at Sean one last time. He was looking down at Khloe, his profile sharp and resolute, the man who had spent hours tracing the constellations of freckles on Eliana's shoulders, who had sworn that her humanity was his salvation, was gone. In his place stood the vampire king, cold, absolute, and untouchable. A sudden, sharp cramp seized Eliana's lower abdomen, a bizarre, flaring heat that contrasted violently with the freezing temperature of the cathedral. Her hand instinctively dropped from her chest to her stomach. A profound, instinctual terror washed over her, overriding even the crushing heartbreak. She didn't know what the sensation was, but her body screamed a singular, undeniable command: run. Without another word, Eliana turned her back on the altar. She gathered the heavy, voluminous skirts of her silk gown into her fists, the delicate beading tearing against her frantic grip. She descended the marble steps, her satin-clad feet slipping, but she caught herself, driven by a sudden, feral adrenaline. The crowd parted for her, drawing back as if her humiliation were contagious. She walked down the long, crimson carpet that she had floated down just minutes before. Each step felt like walking through deep water, her ears ringing with the sound of the high priest beginning the ancient vows, the vows meant for her with her sister. When she reached the massive, iron-studded oak doors at the back of the cathedral, the guards did not try to stop her. They pushed the heavy wood open, letting the roaring, violent storm outside spill into the sacred space. Eliana threw herself into the freezing rain, the massive doors slamming shut behind her with a booming finality, severing her from the only world and the only man she had ever truly loved. The rain hit Eliana like physical blows, the heavy, icy drops instantly plastering her intricate updo to her skull and soaking the heavy silk of her wedding dress until it weighed her down like a suit of armor. The sprawling courtyard of the immortal citadel was deserted, the black cobblestones slick and treacherous beneath the flashing lightning. Thunder cracked directly overhead, a violent punctuation to the destruction of her life. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get as far away from the oppressive, magic-soaked walls of the vampire capital as possible. The heavy, beaded train of her dress dragged through the mud and puddles, acting as a literal anchor. With a ragged, furious sob, Eliana stopped beside a stone gargoyle, reached down, and ripped the silk fabric at the thigh. The tearing sound was lost in the wind. She stripped away the heavy tulle underskirts, leaving herself in a ruined, ragged slip of wet silk that clung to her shivering frame. Free of the excess weight, she sprinted toward the perimeter woods. Her lungs burned, drawing in gulps of freezing air that tasted of ozone and wet earth. Her bare arms were soon covered in scratches from the aggressive, thorny underbrush of the dark forest, but she couldn't feel the pain. All she could feel was the echoing void in her chest where Sean's presence had been, a phantom limb of the soul that throbbed with excruciating agony. As she pushed deeper into the tree line, moving toward the distant, hidden train lines that connected the human territories to the immortal borders, the bizarre cramping in her stomach returned. This time, it was not a fleeting flutter, but a deep, resonant ache that forced her to a sudden halt. Eliana grabbed the rough bark of an ancient pine tree, her knees buckling. She retched, emptying her stomach into the ferns. Her body was shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering in the cold. But beneath her skin, a strange, localized heat began to radiate outward from her core. She placed a trembling hand flat against her damp abdomen. It was impossible. Her mother had been human, her father a vampire, making Eliana a rare hybrid. It was a well-documented biological fact within the courts that hybrids were sterile. The immortal magic and human biology warred against each other, rendering reproduction an impossibility. Sean had known this. They had discussed it, mourned it, and eventually accepted that their legacy would be their reign, not their children. Yet, as she pressed her fingers against her skin, she felt it. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a microscopic pulse of raw, ancient magic. It was the distinct, unmistakable thrum of vampire vitality, interwoven with the steady, fragile rhythm of human life. Two distinct pulses, two sparks. No, Eliana whispered into the rain, the sound a ragged exhale of disbelief and rising panic. No, no, no. The reality crashed down on her with more force than the thunderstorm. She was pregnant, with the Vampire King's children, and he had just abandoned her at the altar for a pureblood. The political implications slammed into her racing mind. The vampire court was ruthless, built on bloodlines, power, and absolute dominance. If Khloe, now the queen, ever discovered that Eliana carried Sean's heirs, hybrid heirs, no less, which the purists would view as an abomination, while others might view them as a legitimate threat to the throne, they would be hunted down. Khloe would never allow a rival bloodline to exist, especially not one born from the sister she had just publicly humiliated and usurped. Sean might protect them, but Sean had just proven his absolute capacity for betrayal. He had looked her in the eye and chosen power and purity over love. She could not trust him. She could not trust anyone. If she stayed anywhere near the immortal territories, her unborn children would be executed before they drew their first breath. A new, fierce energy surged through Eliana's exhausted muscles. The crushing, paralyzing heartbreak was suddenly eclipsed by a primal, blinding maternal instinct. She pushed away from the tree, her spine straightening. The rain continued to batter her, but the cold no longer registered. She wasn't just Eliana the discarded bride anymore. She was a sanctuary, a protector of two impossibly fragile lives. She navigated the dark woods purely by memory and desperation, eventually reaching the rusted chain-link fence that marked the boundary of the immortal lands. Beyond it lay the human world, chaotic, mortal, and vast enough to hide in. She climbed the fence, tearing her hands on the wire, and dropped onto the muddy embankment of the railway tracks. Hours later, huddled in the dark, freezing corner of a freight car rattling toward the coast, Eliana wrapped her arms tightly around her waist. She was shivering violently, dressed in the muddy rags of a wedding gown, possessing nothing but the clothes on her back, and the tiny, miraculous pulses beating deep within her. She closed her eyes, forcing back the tears. "I will protect you," she whispered into the rhythmic clattering of the train, making a vow far more sacred than the one she was supposed to make at the altar. "I will hide you from him. From all of them. Forever." The coastal town of San Oakhaven was perpetually draped in a comforting, thick marine fog that smelled of salt, rusted iron, and anonymity. It was a human town, gritty and hard-working. A place where people minded their own business and asked few questions of strangers. For the past 5 years, it had been Eliana's perfect sanctuary. "Mom, Leo is doing it again!" Eliana wiped her flour-dusted hands on her canvas apron and leaned out of the small, cramped kitchen of their rented cottage. In the tiny living room, chaos was unfolding with the predictable rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon. Maya, a miniature hurricane of dark curls and fierce defiance, was pointing an accusatory finger at her brother. Leo, identical to his sister in nearly every way except for the terrifyingly calm demeanor he had inherited from a father he had never met, was sitting cross-legged on the rug. Hovering exactly 2 inches above his open palm was a heavy, glass snow globe. He wasn't touching it. "Leo, please," Eliana sighed, feeling the familiar spike of pure panic lodge in her throat. She rushed forward, snatching the snow globe out of the air. The moment her hand broke his concentration, the faint, shimmering aura of kinetic magic dissipated. "It's just gravity, Mom," Leo said, looking up at her with eyes that still made Eliana's breath catch. They were striking, luminous silver, the exact, undeniable marker of royal vampire blood. Maya had them too. "It's not gravity, Bug, it's magic, and we talked about this," Eliana said, dropping her voice to a harsh, urgent whisper, glancing instinctively at the drawn curtains. "No showing off, not even in the house. You never know who is watching." "Nobody is watching, Mom," Maya huffed, crossing her arms over her faded denim overalls. "We're in the middle of nowhere, and besides, I want my steak. Rare. You promised." Eliana rubbed her temples, feeling a headache blossoming. The twins were 5 years old, but their minds and bodies developed at a terrifying, accelerated pace. They looked closer to 8, spoke with the vocabulary of teenagers, and possessed physical strength and magical aptitudes that Eliana struggled daily to contain. Their dual nature was a constant tightrope walk. They could walk in the sunlight without burning, a gift of her human blood, but they required a diet heavy in iron and raw proteins, and their vampire instincts were sharp, predatory, and difficult to manage. "Steak is coming," Eliana promised, ushering them toward the small dining table. She returned to the kitchen, taking a moment to grip the edge of the counter and close her eyes. 5 years. She had built a life out of absolute nothing. She worked nights managing inventory at a local fishing warehouse, a job that paid in cash and required no background checks, and spent her days homeschooling the twins, terrified to let them out of her sight. She had dyed her striking silver blonde hair, a dull, mousy brown, wore baggy clothes to hide her figure, and lived in a state of constant, low-grade hypervigilance. She had succeeded in disappearing. Not a single whisper of the immortal courts had reached San Oakhaven, but the older the twins got, the harder it was becoming. Their magic was leaking. Leo could move small objects with his mind, and Maya had begun to exhibit a terrifying degree of empathetic compulsion. She could look at a grumpy grocer and make him hand over free apples with a single, silver-eyed stare. Eliana plated the steaks, seared quickly on the outside and bleeding red on the inside, just the way their biology demanded. As she set the plates down, the wind outside picked up, rattling the thin window panes. Suddenly, Maya froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her silver eyes dilated, swallowing the iris until they were nearly completely black. "Maya?" Eliana asked, her maternal alarm instantly flaring. "What is it?" Leo stopped eating as well. He slowly turned his head toward the front door, his small nostrils flaring. "Cold," Maya whispered, her voice dropping an octave, sounding ancient and terrified. "It smells like old cold." A heavy, unnatural silence descended on the cottage. The ambient sounds of the coastal wind and the distant highway vanished, replaced by a suffocating, static pressure that made Eliana's ears pop. It was a ward. Someone had just cast a silencing ward over the house. Ice flooded Eliana's veins. She didn't hesitate. Under the floorboards, she hissed, pointing to the rug. Now, both of you, do not make a sound. The twins, trained for this exact nightmare scenario since they could walk, moved with terrifying speed. Eliana threw back the rug, pried up the loose floorboard she had rigged years ago, and shoved them into the dark, cramped crawl space. No matter what you hear, Eliana whispered fiercely, looking into their glowing, terrified eyes. You do not come out. Do you understand? Leo nodded grimly. Eliana dropped the board back into place, threw the rug over it, and stood up just as a rhythmic, heavy knocking sounded at the front door. 3 slow, deliberate strikes. Eliana grabbed the heavy iron fire poker from the hearth. Her hands were shaking, but her jaw was set. She walked to the door, her heart hammering a frantic, desperate beat against her ribs. She unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open an inch. Standing on her porch, wrapped in a heavy leather trench coat, was a man Eliana recognized instantly. Marcus, the captain of the Royal Guard, Sean's right-hand man. Marcus looked down at her, his eyes glowing a faint, predatory amber in the gloom. He didn't look like a conqueror. He looked exhausted, desperate, and hollowed out. "Hello, Eliana," Marcus said, his voice a low gravel. "We've been looking for you for a very, very long time. The king requests your immediate presence." "You have the wrong house," Eliana said, her voice eerily calm, despite the pure adrenaline rocketing through her system. She began to close the door, but Marcus moved with a blur of vampire speed, lodging his heavy combat boot firmly in the threshold. "Don't do this, Eliana," Marcus warned, his tone lacking his usual arrogant edge. Instead, he sounded weary, leaning his weight against the doorframe. "I tracked your hybrid scent across 3 states. Do you know how hard it is to find someone who smells like half a ghost? The king sent me personally. If I don't bring you back, he will come himself, and he will tear this town down to the bedrock to find you." Eliana tightened her grip on the iron poker hidden behind the door. "Sean made his choice 5 years ago. He has his queen. Tell him I'm dead. Tell him I threw myself into the sea. I don't care, but you will leave this property right now." Marcus let out a harsh, barking laugh that held absolutely no humor. "His queen? Is that what you think is happening back at the Citadel?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The realm is dying, Eliana. The crops in the immortal lands are turning to ash. The rivers are running black. The magic that sustains the wards is collapsing." Eliana frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion piercing through her terror. The immortal realm was sustained by the true bond of the ruling monarchs. A strong, fated match between a king and queen fed the ley lines of their land. That's impossible. Khloe is a pureblood. Their bond should have fortified the realm for a millennia. "There is no bond," Marcus hissed, his eyes flashing with desperate anger. "He married her, yes. He crowned her, but he never bonded with her. He refused the final blood rite. He has spent the last 5 years sitting on a throne of ice, barely speaking, barely ruling, while your sister tears the court apart with her paranoia and cruelty. The magic of the land rejected her because the king's soul rejected her. The land demands the true mate. It demands you." Eliana's breath hitched. Sean hadn't completed the bond. He had chosen Khloe, humiliated Eliana, but then refused to seal the very pact that gave him absolute power? It made no sense. It was a strategic and personal contradiction that made her head spin. But none of it mattered. It was ancient history. "I am not his mate," Eliana said coldly. "He broke whatever tether we had when he dropped my hand at the altar. I am not going back to save a kingdom that threw me out like garbage, and I am certainly not going back to save him." "Move your foot, Marcus." "I can't do that," Marcus said softly, and in a terrifyingly swift motion, he pushed the door wide open, stepping into the cramped living room. Eliana swung the heavy iron poker with all her hybrid strength, aiming directly for his temple. Marcus caught the iron bar mid-swing with one hand. The metal groaned in his grip. He didn't even flinch. He easily wrenched the poker from her hands and tossed it clattering into the corner. "I am not here to hurt you, Eliana," he said, holding his hands up defensively. "I am here to escort you, and you will come. Because if you don't—" He paused, his sharp amber eyes scanning the small room. He paused on the dining table. 2 plates, 2 half-eaten bloody steaks, 2 small glasses of milk. The color drained from Marcus's face. The exhaustion in his eyes was instantly replaced by profound, unadulterated shock. He slowly turned his head, his gaze landing precisely on the rug covering the floorboards. Eliana's blood ran cold. Vampires could hear a heartbeat from a mile away if they concentrated. From 5 feet away, he didn't even have to try. "By the ancestors," Marcus whispered, taking a slow step backward. 2 rapid heartbeats, a child's rhythm, but the scent, Silver and iron. He looked back at Eliana, his face a mask of awe and terror. You didn't just run. You hid his heirs. They are my children, Eliana screamed, dropping all pretense. She threw herself between Marcus and the rug, her fingernails lengthening into jagged hybrid claws, her own eyes flashing a dangerous, reflective gold. If you touch that floorboard, I swear to God, Marcus, I will rip your throat out and watch you turn to dust. Marcus raised his hands higher, taking another step back toward the door. I won't touch them. I swear on my life, Eliana, I won't. But you have to understand the gravity of this. If I heard them, the trackers Khloe sent will hear them too. Khloe doesn't know about them, Eliana sneered. Khloe knows I came looking for you. She has her own spies. She is terrified the king will find you and replace her. If her assassins find you first, they won't ask questions. They will slaughter you and those children to secure her throne. Marcus looked genuinely terrified for her. You cannot protect them here, Eliana. Not from a royal hit squad. The only place in the world where they will be safe from Khloe's reach is under the direct protection of the king's personal guard within the citadel. Eliana stood frozen, her claws still extended, her chest heaving. The terrible, crushing weight of reality settled over her. She had run to the ends of the earth to keep them safe, but the very act of their existence was a beacon she could no longer hide. Pack your things, Marcus said quietly, turning his back to give her privacy. We leave in 10 minutes. The king is waiting at the border. The rain at the border checkpoint was a torrential deluge, mirroring the night Eliana had fled 5 years ago. The massive, armored SUV tore through the muddy access road, its tires kicking up thick sheets of water. In the back seat, Eliana sat rigidly, her arms wrapped protectively around Leo and Maya. The twins were uncharacteristically silent, their wide silver eyes taking in the dark, imposing trees of the immortal perimeter. They could feel the shift in the air. The heavy ozone-scented magic of the vampire realm was seeping through the windows. The SUV ground to a halt in front of an abandoned, rust-covered train depot. Marcus turned off the engine, the silence inside the cabin thick and suffocating. He's out there, Marcus said quietly, not looking back at them. Eliana looked through the rain-streaked window. Standing alone on the crumbling concrete platform, illuminated only by the harsh, flickering yellow light of a broken street lamp, was Sean. 5 years had not aged him. Immortality prevented that, but they had carved something bleak and hollow into his features. He wore a simple black coat, soaked through with rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. Stay here, Eliana whispered fiercely to the twins. Do not open these doors. Do not unbuckle your seatbelts. She stepped out of the vehicle into the freezing rain, slamming the heavy door behind her to muffle the sound of the children inside. She walked slowly toward the platform, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Sean watched her approach, his chest rising and falling in sharp, jagged breaths. As she stepped into the circle of yellow light, his crimson eyes raked over her. He took in her dyed brown hair, the cheap, rain-soaked jacket, the hard defensive set of her shoulders. The arrogant, untouchable king from the altar was gone. He looked like a man who had been wandering in a desert and had finally found a drop of water. Eliana, he breathed. The sound of his voice speaking her name, a low, raspy velvet, sent a violent shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He took a hesitant step forward, raising a hand as if to touch her face. Eliana slapped his hand away with brutal force. The sharp crack echoed over the rain. Do not touch me, she spat, her voice vibrating with 5 years of suppressed rage and agony. You lost the right to touch me the second you took my sister's hand. Sean flinched, absorbing the blow without complaint. I know, he said, his voice raw. I know what I did. I know you hate me. I accept your hatred, Eliana. I deserve it. But I had to find you. The realm. I don't care about your realm, Eliana interrupted, stepping closer, tilting her chin up to glare directly into his eyes. I don't care that your magic is failing. I don't care that your miserable wife is tearing your court apart. You made your bed, Sean. You chose power. You chose purity. Now you get to rot in it. Sean's jaw tightened, a flash of ancient pain crossing his features. It wasn't about power, Ellie. It was never about power. Don't call me that, she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. Only the man who loved me gets to call me that. And that man died on the altar. Sean closed his eyes, raindrops trailing down his pale cheeks like tears. I am begging you, he said softly. Come back to the Citadel, just to heal the land. Name your price. Gold, freedom, anything. I will grant it. But I need your blood signature to stabilize the wards, or thousands of innocent immortals will starve. Eliana let out a bitter, mocking laugh. You want me to be a battery for your kingdom? To sit in a tower while you parade my sister around as your queen? You are out of your mind. She turned on her heel, marching back toward the SUV. Marcus can drive me back to the coast. If you try to stop me, I will fight you, and I promise you, Sean, I will not hold back. Eliana, wait. Sean lunged forward, grabbing her arm. Eliana spun around, her hybrid fangs descending in a flash of pure aggression. Let go of me. At the sound of her scream, the back door of the armored SUV burst open. Eliana's heart stopped. Mom! Leo yelled, scrambling out into the rain, his small face twisted in fury. He didn't run to her. He raised his hands, his silver eyes flashing brilliantly in the dark. The heavy, steel trash can on the platform suddenly ripped free of its concrete bolts. It flew through the air with terrifying velocity, hurtling directly toward Sean's head. Sean reacted with centuries of honed combat reflexes. He didn't flinch. He simply raised his free hand, catching the massive steel can mid-air, the metal crumpling violently beneath his grip. He dropped it to the concrete with a deafening crash. But Sean wasn't looking at the trash can. He wasn't looking at Eliana. He was staring past her, his crimson eyes blown wide in a state of absolute, paralyzed shock. Eliana turned her head. Maya had climbed out of the car behind her brother. The two children stood in the rain, drenched and glaring at the Vampire King with pure, unadulterated hostility. Two tiny figures, possessing Eliana's nose and mouth, but staring back at Sean with his exact, undeniable, silver-flecked, immortal eyes. The silence that fell over the platform was heavier than the storm. Sean slowly released Eliana's arm. His hands began to shake. The blood drained entirely from his already pale face. He fell to his knees on the wet concrete, ignoring the mud, his eyes fixed on the twins. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a ragged, shattered gasp came out. He looked up at Eliana, his expression a devastating mix of profound awe and world-ending devastation. Twins, he whispered, the word barely audible. You had my children. Eliana stepped protectively in front of Leo and Maya, shielding them from his view. She looked down at the king on his knees, her expression as hard as carved marble. I had my children, Eliana corrected him coldly. You have nothing. The journey from the border to the heart of the vampire citadel took 3 agonizing hours. The atmosphere inside the extended cabin of the royal vehicle was so tense it felt combustible. Sean sat in the rear-facing jump seats, his posture rigidly straight, his eyes never leaving the twins. He looked like a man starving to death who had just been placed in front of a banquet he was forbidden to touch. Eliana sat opposite him, holding Maya in her lap, while Leo pressed tightly against her side. She maintained a fierce, unyielding glare directed entirely at Sean, silently daring him to speak. For the first hour, he didn't. He just watched them. He watched how Leo subconsciously manipulated the shadows in the corner of the car to entertain himself. He watched how Maya's silver eyes tracked the raindrops on the window with predatory focus. He was studying them, reading the microscopic tells of his own bloodline woven with Eliana's human frailty. Finally, Sean cleared his throat. The sound was rough. They are magnificent. Don't! Eliana snapped instantly, her voice slicing through the quiet. Do not pretend to be a father now. You don't know them. Sean flinched, but he didn't look away. I didn't know they existed, Eliana. If I had known. If you had known. What? She challenged, leaning forward, her eyes blazing. You would have forced me to stay? Kept me locked in a gilded cage as an incubator while you married Khloe? Or would you have let the council execute them because hybrid heirs threaten the purity of your precious bloodline? I would have torn the world apart to keep you all safe. Sean's voice suddenly boomed, the terrifying authority of the king finally breaking through his broken demeanor. The windows of the SUV rattled. Maya whimpered, burying her face in Eliana's neck. Sean's face instantly crumbled. He raised a hand, his eyes filled with self-loathing. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry, little one. He looked back at Eliana, his voice dropping to a desperate plea. You have to believe me. Everything I did, every choice I made 5 years ago, was to keep you alive. Eliana scoffed, turning her head to stare out the window at the passing dark forest. Save your lies, Sean. I was there. I saw you choose her. You saw what I needed you to see, Sean insisted, leaning closer, the desperation radiating off him in waves. The council, the high priest, the ancient laws. They discovered something about your bloodline, Eliana. A flaw in the hybrid genetics. If we had completed the blood rite at the altar, the surge of pure, immortal magic would have burned the human half of your soul away. It would have killed you instantly. I found out hours before the wedding. Eliana froze. Her heart skipped a beat, her mind scrambling to process the words. She slowly turned her head back to him, searching his face for deceit, but she only saw raw, unvarnished agony. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered, her voice trembling. Because you would have done it anyway. Sean fired back, his own voice breaking. You would have sacrificed yourself for the bond. You told me 1,000 times you didn't care about the risks. But I cared. I couldn't watch you die on that altar. The only way to save your life, the only way to appease the ancient magic and the council, was to sever the bond entirely and bind myself to a pureblood. To Khloe, I broke your heart to keep it beating. Eliana stared at him, the walls of anger she had built for 5 years suddenly cracking, threatening to collapse under the weight of his confession. If he was telling the truth, if he had sacrificed his own happiness, subjected himself to a loveless eternity with a woman he despised, just to let Eliana live. And Khloe? Eliana asked, her voice tight. Did she know? Sean's expression darkened into something lethal. Khloe knew the prophecy. She knew the rite would kill you. She was the one who brought the texts to the high priest. She orchestrated it, Eliana. She forced my hand, knowing I would choose your life over our union. A cold, creeping dread settled in Eliana's stomach. Her sister hadn't just stolen her future. She had actively plotted her murder by magic, settling for the crown when Sean found a loophole. Which is why, Sean continued, his gaze shifting to the twins. We are in terrible danger now. Khloe has spent 5 years solidifying her power, but the realm is dying because I refuse to bloodbind with her. If she discovers that you are alive, and that you bore my children, she will kill them to protect her claim, Eliana finished, clutching Maya tighter. She will try, Sean corrected, his crimson eyes flashing with a sudden, violent promise. But she will have to go through me first. We are going to the Citadel, Eliana. I will hide you in my personal sanctuary. I will not lose you again, any of you. As the massive, obsidian walls of the vampire capital loomed in the distance, cutting a jagged silhouette against the stormy sky, Eliana realized the game of hiding was over. She had run from a broken heart, only to return to a war for her children's survival. The Citadel was a shadow of its former glory. As Sean escorted Eliana and the twins through the private underground entrances to the royal wing, Eliana could feel the decay in the air. The once vibrant magic that thrummed through the obsidian walls felt sluggish, diseased. The lush indoor gardens were wilted, the silver-leaved trees dropping dead foliage onto the marble floors. Sean sequestered them in his personal chambers, a massive, heavily warded suite that felt more like a vault than a bedroom. He posted his 4 most trusted guards, including Marcus, at the only door. Stay here. Do not open the door for anyone but me, Sean instructed, his eyes lingering on the twins, who were currently exploring a massive velvet sofa with cautious curiosity. He looked at Eliana, a silent, desperate plea for trust passing between them. He turned and vanished into the corridor. Eliana paced the room. 2 hours passed. The heavy, claustrophobic atmosphere of the Citadel was pressing down on her. Suddenly, the wards on the heavy oak door flared violently. The protective magic hissed, flashing a warning red. From the corridor, Eliana heard the sound of a brief, brutal scuffle, followed by a heavy thud. The door swung open. Standing in the threshold, stepping gracefully over the unconscious body of Marcus, was Khloe. She was breathtaking, terrifying, and completely consumed by dark magic. She wore a gown of spun silver, a heavy obsidian crown resting on her dark hair. Her eyes, however, were manic. They darted around the room, landing instantly on Eliana, and then, slowly, sliding to the 2 small children huddled behind Eliana's legs. Khloe let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. So, the little rat finally crawled out of the gutters. Get out, Khloe, Eliana said, her voice deadly calm. She positioned her body perfectly between her sister and the twins, her claws fully extending. Khloe ignored her, taking a slow, predatory step into the room. 5 years. 5 years I have sat on that throne, bleeding my own magic into the soil, trying to keep this miserable kingdom alive while my husband treats me like a leper. I knew he was hiding something. I knew he was looking for you. But this? She pointed a long, silver-tipped fingernail at Leo. Abominations. Filthy, half-breed mistakes. They are his heirs, Eliana countered, her hybrid eyes glowing gold. And they have more right to this realm than you ever will. Khloe's face twisted in pure, ugly fury. They have a right to the ash heap. You think he brought you here to save you? You idiot. He brought you here because the high priest finally interpreted the rest of the prophecy. Eliana frowned, maintaining her defensive stance. What prophecy? The one he supposedly saved you from, Khloe sneered, pacing sideways like a caged panther. Yes, the binding ritual would have killed you, little sister, because human blood cannot withstand the pure surge of the crown's magic. But the prophecy also stated that the realm would only thrive under the rule of the true bloodline, not just the king, but his progeny. Khloe stopped, a wicked, triumphant smile spreading across her face. Sean's magic is failing because he needs an heir to anchor the ley lines. He didn't bring you here to play house, Eliana. He brought you here to harvest the twins. He needs to drain their hybrid magic to stabilize the throne. He is going to sacrifice them. Eliana's breath stopped. The room spun. You're lying, she whispered. But the seed of doubt, planted by 5 years of betrayal, took root instantly. Am I? Khloe whispered, raising her hands. Dark, toxic, green magic began to pool in her palms. Why don't we test his loyalty? Let's see if he arrives in time to save his little batteries before I turn them into dust. Khloe launched a violently fast strike of dark magic directly at Eliana. Eliana threw up her hands, using her own raw, desperate kinetic shield to block it. The impact threw Eliana backward, crashing into a heavy mahogany table. Mom! Leo screamed. Khloe advanced, her eyes fixed entirely on the children. She raised her hand again, preparing a lethal strike. Eliana scrambled on the floor, her vision blurred, realizing with horrifying clarity that she was not strong enough to beat a fully charged, pure-blood queen in a magical duel. Stay away from them! Eliana shrieked, preparing to throw her physical body over the children to take the fatal blow. Before Khloe could release the magic, the windows of the chamber shattered inward in a massive explosion of glass and dark energy. Sean descended into the room like a falling star, a creature of pure, terrifying wrath. He didn't use magic. He used raw, brutal physical force. He slammed into Khloe, driving her across the room and pinning her against the far stone wall with a sickening crack. His hand was wrapped tightly around her throat, lifting her off the floor. His crimson eyes were burning like supernovas. If you ever, Sean roared, the sound shaking the very foundations of the castle. Look at my children again. I will tear your soul out through your teeth. Khloe gasped for air, her silver shoes kicking uselessly against the wall. Despite being choked, a dark, manic grin stretched across her face. Tell her, she wheezed, staring at Sean. Tell her why you need them. Tell her about the blood anchor. Sean's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Eliana to see it. He dropped Khloe, letting her slump to the floor, gasping and coughing. Sean turned slowly to face Eliana. The terrifying king was gone again, replaced by the desperate, exhausted man. Eliana, he started, taking a step toward her. Is it true? Eliana demanded, her voice shaking uncontrollably. She pulled the twins tightly against her chest, retreating against the far wall. Did you bring us back here to use them? To drain them? No, Sean shouted, the word torn from his chest. Never. I would burn this entire kingdom to the ground before I let a single drop of their blood be spilled. Then what is she talking about? Eliana screamed, tears finally breaking free, carving hot trails down her cheeks. Why are we here, Sean? If you didn't know about them, why were you looking for me? Just to tell me you were sorry? Sean ran a trembling hand through his hair. He looked at Khloe, who was laughing weakly on the floor, and then back to Eliana. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating under the weight of 5 years of unspoken agony. Because the prophecy was flawed, Sean said, his voice dropping to an intense, quiet urgency. Or rather, it was intentionally weaponized against us. He took a hesitant step forward, his boots crunching on the shattered glass of the ruined window. After you left, the realm didn't stabilize. It began to rot from the inside out. I spent 5 years in the deepest, forgotten levels of the royal archives. I locked myself in the dark, tearing apart every ancient scroll and blood-sealed tome I could find to figure out why my sacrifice hadn't worked. I was losing my mind, Eliana. I thought I had damned my kingdom for nothing, and worse, I had broken you for nothing. He turned to glare at Khloe, pure disgust radiating from his features. And then, 3 weeks ago, I found it. The original text of the First Kings, hidden away in a vault that Khloe had tried to have permanently sealed before our wedding. The high priest didn't just translate it wrong. Khloe fed him a corrupted version. She poisoned his mind and the council's ears with half-truths. Khloe let out a dry, rasping laugh from the floor, wiping a streak of black blood from her chin. It was so easy, Sean. You were so blinded by your pathetic love for a half-breed that you didn't even question it. I handed the high priest the dagger, and he happily buried it in your back. And I got to wear the crown. Sean ignored her venom, turning back to Eliana. His crimson eyes were bright, brimming with unshed tears. The ritual wouldn't have killed you because you are human, Eliana. It would have killed you because you were incomplete. The magic of the throne requires a trinity of power. King, queen, and the future. The bloodline. The only way for a hybrid to survive the coronation surge is if she is anchored by the magic of her own immortal offspring. Eliana stared at him, her mind halting as the horrific puzzle pieces finally clicked together. She remembered the day of the wedding, the bizarre, flaring heat in her lower abdomen right after the bond snapped, the instinctual, primal terror that told her to run. It wasn't just a physical reaction. It was the twins' latent magic, flaring in defense against the trauma of the severing. 5 years ago, Sean continued, his voice breaking into a ragged sob. If we had gone through with the bonding, you would have survived. The magic wouldn't have burned you away, because you were already carrying the anchors. The twins' latent magic inside you would have protected you, absorbed the surge, and stabilized the realm. I didn't know you were pregnant. We both thought you were sterile. If I had known, if I had felt even a whisper of their life inside you, I never would have let you go. I would have bound us that day, and we would have reigned together. Eliana looked down at her hands, trembling uncontrollably. The truth slammed into her with the force of a tidal wave, stripping away the bitter armor she had worn for half a decade. He hadn't abandoned her out of disgust for her humanity. He hadn't brought her back to sacrifice their children. He had made a horrific, world-shattering mistake based on a lie fabricated by the sister Eliana had grown up trusting. He had deliberately broken both their hearts and subjected himself to a living hell just to save her life, completely unaware that the very children growing inside her womb were the cure to the curse. "You fool," Eliana whispered, fresh, hot tears falling freely now. Her golden eyes met his crimson ones, the ice around her heart finally, irreversibly melting. "You absolute noble, stupid fool." A sudden, sharp laugh echoed from the corner, cutting through the fragile moment of reconciliation. Khloe pushed herself up onto her knees. Her eyes were completely black now, entirely consumed by the dark magic she was desperately drawing from the dying citadel's foundation. "It's a beautiful story," Khloe sneered, wiping the blood from her lip, her silver gown stained and ruined. "Tragic, romantic, but it's entirely too late. The blood moon rises tonight. The realm is starving, and I am the crowned queen. I have bled for this soil. I will not be usurped by a half-breed and her mongrel children." Khloe raised her hands, her fingers contorting unnaturally. The shadows in the room suddenly detached from the walls, forming solid, wicked blade-like tendrils that hissed and whipped through the air. "If I can't have the king's magic to sustain me, I will take the children's. And I will build a new, pure empire on your ashes." Sean stepped decisively in front of Eliana and the twins. His own magic flared, not the defensive, hollow magic he had used for 5 years, but a brilliant, blinding white light of pure royal authority that pushed back the encroaching shadows. "You will try," Sean said softly, his voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute calm that echoed with lethal promise. "And you will die." The battle that erupted within the royal chambers was a terrifying clash of ancient, elemental forces. Khloe, fueled by 5 years of hoarded dark magic and desperate paranoia, unleashed a torrent of shadow blades and kinetic blasts. Sean met every strike with devastating precision, his white-hot royal magic shattering her attacks in mid-air. But Khloe wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting to distract. As Sean deflected a massive surge of dark energy, a tendril of shadow slipped past his guard, snaking rapidly across the floor toward the twins. Eliana saw it instantly. Her maternal instinct, honed by 5 years of constant vigilance, overrode her fear. She threw herself forward, her hybrid claws fully extended, and slashed through the shadow tendril. It dissolved into black smoke, but the kinetic backlash sent Eliana tumbling across the floor. "Ellie!" Sean roared, distracted for a fraction of a second. Khloe seized the opening. She slammed both hands into the ground, sending a shockwave of dark magic that knocked Sean off his feet, pinning him against the ceiling with oppressive gravitational force. Khloe slowly walked toward Eliana, who was struggling to rise, her body battered and bruised. The twins screamed from the corner. "It always ends like this, doesn't it?" Khloe mocked, standing over her sister. "You, weak and broken on the floor. Me, taking what is rightfully mine." She raised a hand, a spear of pure dark energy forming in her palm, aimed directly at Eliana's heart. "Goodbye, little sister." "No." The voice didn't come from Sean. It came from the corner of the room. Leo and Maya stepped forward. Their small faces were masks of pure, terrifying focus. Their silver eyes were glowing with a blinding intensity. They reached out, grabbing each other's hands. A pulse of raw, unadulterated hybrid magic, a perfect fusion of human resilience and immortal power, exploded from the children. It hit Khloe like a physical wall, throwing her backward. The spear of dark energy shattered into a million harmless sparks. The children's magic didn't stop. It radiated outward, a wave of shimmering silver and gold light. It hit Sean, instantly breaking Khloe's gravitational hold, dropping him safely to the floor. And then, the magic washed over Eliana. Eliana felt an incredible surge of heat, healing her bruises, filling her exhausted veins with a power she had never known. She looked at her children, realizing what was happening. They were anchoring her, They were offering her the strength she needed to complete what was started 5 years ago. Sean saw it too. He rushed to Eliana's side, pulling her to her feet. The massive windows revealed the sky outside, where the clouds were parting, revealing the massive, crimson orb of the blood moon. The alignment was perfect. "Eliana," Sean breathed, his eyes locked with hers, surrounded by the swirling, protective magic of their children. "Do you trust me?" Eliana looked at the man who had broken her heart to save her, the man who was now standing with her against the darkness. She looked at their children, radiant and strong. "Yes," she whispered. Sean took her hand, not the hesitant, doomed grasp of 5 years ago, but a firm, desperate, unyielding grip. He raised his other hand, pressing his palm to the center of Eliana's chest. Eliana mirrored the movement, pressing her hand over his heart. "I claim you," Sean spoke the ancient vows, his voice echoing with the power of the blood moon. "My mate, my equal, my queen, I accept you," Eliana replied, her voice steady and clear, fueled by the anchoring magic of Leo and Maya. "My mate, my king, my eternity." The bond snapped into place. It wasn't a spark, it was an inferno. The white magic of the king and the unique, resilient gold magic of the hybrid queen collided, anchored and stabilized by the silver light of their heirs. A massive pillar of pure, blinding light erupted from them, blasting through the roof of the citadel, shooting directly into the blood moon. The dying ley lines of the realm instantly ignited. The dark, diseased magic that Khloe had spread was incinerated in a split second. The wilted trees in the courtyard burst into silver bloom. The suffocating air cleared, replaced by the crisp, electric scent of ozone and life. Khloe screamed as the wave of pure bonding magic hit her. Her dark power was stripped away instantly, leaving her nothing but an exhausted, powerless vampire. She collapsed, weeping in the corner as the king's guards, freed from her spells, stormed into the room to apprehend her. But Eliana didn't look at her sister. She was looking at Sean. The hollow, dead look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a radiant, overwhelming love. He pulled her into a desperate, crushing kiss, a promise of 5 lost years finally fulfilled. When they finally broke apart, Sean dropped to his knees, pulling Leo and Maya into his arms, burying his face in their shoulders as he openly wept. Eliana knelt beside them, wrapping her arms around her family, finally home, under a sky that would never be dark again. The truest bonds are rarely the easiest. Eliana and Sean's journey reminds us that sometimes the deepest acts of love are disguised as the hardest sacrifices, and that true strength doesn't lie in running from the past, but in facing it to protect the future you have built. Their fractured family, healed by the very children meant to be a secret, proves that light can always pierce the darkest of betrayals. If this dramatic tale of hidden heirs, heartbreaking choices, and a love that defied a kingdom kept you on the edge of your seat, please consider giving it a like. Share this story with your friends who love a good cinematic romance, and don't forget to subscribe for more intensely emotional, character-driven stories.